The Navidson Record, Part 2. The labours of men and genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. Mary Shelley. The Navidson Record actually contains two films. The one Navidson made, which everyone remembers, and the one he set out to make, which very few people ever detect. While easily overshadowed by the finished film, the filmmaker's original intentions provide an early context in which to view the peculiar properties of the house later on. In many ways, the opening of the Navidson Record, shot back in April of 1990, remains one of the more disturbing sequences because it so effectively denies itself even the slightest premonition about what will soon take place on Ash Tree Lane. Not once during those initial minutes does Navidson indicate he knows anything about the impending nature he and his entire family are about to face. He is wholly innocent, and the nature of the house, at least for a little while, lies beyond his imagination, let alone his suspicions. Of course, not everyone remains in accordance with this assessment. Dr. Isaiah Rosen believes Navidson's a fraud from frame one, and his early posturing puts the entire work at risk. Rosen assumes the beginning is just a case of bad acting performed by a man who has already envisioned the rest of the film. Consequently, Rosen seriously undervalues the importance of Navidson's initial intentions. All too often, major discoveries are the unintended outcome of experiments or explorations aimed at achieving entirely different results. In Navidson's case, it is impossible to disregard his primary goal, especially since it served as progenitor, or at the very least, the near origin to all that followed. Rosen's presumptions led him to dismiss the cause for which the result, thereby losing sight of the complex and rewarding relationship which exists between the two. It's funny, Navidson tells us at the outset. I just want to create a record of how Karen and I bought a small house in the country and moved into it with our children. Sort of see how everything turns out. No gunfire, famine, or flies. Just lots of toothpaste, gardening, and people stuff. Which is how I got the Guggenheim Fellowship and the NEA Media Arts Grant. Maybe because of my past, they're expecting something different. But I just thought it would be nice to see how people move into a place and start to inhabit it. Settle in. Maybe put down roots, interact, hopefully understand each other a little better. Personally, I just want to create a cozy little outpost for me and my family. A place to drink lemonade on the porch and watch the sunset. Which is almost literally how the Navidson Record begins, with Will Navidson relaxing on the porch of his small old-style heritage house, enjoying a glass of lemonade, watching the sun turn the first few minutes of daytime into gold. Despite Rosen's claim, nothing about him seems particularly devious or false, nor does he appear to be acting. In fact, he is a disarmingly pleasant man, lean, attractive, slowly edging through his 40s, determined once and for all to stay in and explore the quieter side of life. At least initially he succeeds, providing us with pristine glimpses of the Virginian countryside. The rural neighborhood, purple hills on the fringe of night, before moving past these establishing shots and focusing more closely on the process of moving into the house itself. Unrolling pale blue oriental rugs, arranging and rearranging furniture, unpacking crates, replacing light bulbs and hanging pictures, including one of his own prize-winning photographs. In this way, Navidson not only reveals how each room is occupied, but how everyone has helped apply his or her own personal texture. At one point, Navidson takes a break to interview his two children. These shots are also impeccably composed. Son and daughter bathed in sunlight, their warmly lit faces framed against a cool backdrop of green lawn and trees. His 5-year-old daughter, Daisy, approves of the new house. "It's nice here," she giggles shyly, though she's not too shy to point out the absence of stores like Bloomingdale's. Chad, who's 3 years older than Daisy, is a little more self-conscious, even serious. Too often his response has been misread by those aware of the film's ending. It is important to realize, however, that at this point in time, Chad has no sense of what the future holds. He is merely expressing anxieties natural for a boy his age who has just been uprooted from his home in the city and deposited in a vastly different environment. As he tells his father, what he misses most is the sound of traffic. It seems the noise made by trucks and taxicabs created for him a kind of evening lullaby. Now he finds it difficult to fall asleep in the quiet. "What about the sound of crickets?" Navidson asks. Chad shakes his head. "It's not the same. I don't know. Sometimes it's just silent. No sound at all." "Does that scare you?" Chad nods. "Why?" "It's like something's Waiting? What? Chad shrugs. I don't know, Daddy. I just like the sound of traffic. Of course, Navidson's pastoral take on his family's move hardly reflects the far more complicated and significant impetus behind his project, namely his foundering relationship with longtime companion Karen Green. While both have been perfectly content not to marry, Navidson's constant assignments abroad have led to increased alienation and untold personal difficulties. After nearly 11 years of constant departures and brief returns, Karen has made it clear that Navidson must either give up his professional habits or lose his family. Ultimately unable to make this choice, he compromises by turning reconciliation into a subject for documentation. None of this, however, is immediately apparent. In fact, it requires some willful amnesia of the more compelling sequences ahead, if you are to detect subtle valences operating between Will and Karen, or as Donna York phrased it, the way they talk to each other, the way they look after each other, and of course, the way they don't. Navidson, we learn, began his project by mounting a number of high 8s around the house and equipping them with motion detectors to turn them on and off whenever someone enters or leaves the room. With the exception of the 3 bathrooms, there are cameras in every corner of the house. Navidson also keeps on hand 2 16mm eye reflexes and his usual battery of 3 35mm cameras. Nevertheless, as everyone knows, Navidson's project is pretty crude. Nothing, for instance, like the constant eye of CCTV systems routinely installed in local banks, or the lavish equipment and multiple camera operators required on MTV's Real World. The whole effort would seem very home movie-ish at best, were it not for the fact that Navidson is an exceptionally gifted photographer who understands how 1/16th of a second can yield an image worth more than 24 hours of continuous footage. He is not interested in showing all of the coverage or attempting to capture some kind of Catholic or otherwise mythical view. Instead, he hunts for moments, pearls of the particular, an unexpected phone call, a burst of laughter, or some snippet of conversation which might elicit from us an emotional spark, or perhaps even a bit of human understanding. More often than not, the near-worldless fragments Navidson selects reveal that what explication could only approximate. 2 such instances seem especially sublime, and because they are so short and easy to miss, it is worth reiterating their content here. In the first one, we see Navidson climbing to the top of the stairs with a crate full of Karen's things. Their bedroom is still cluttered with lamps and bubble wrap and assorted unpacked suitcases and garbage bags, full of clothes. Nothing hangs on the walls, their bed is not yet made. Navidson finds some room on top of the bureau to set down his load. He is about to leave when some invisible impulse stops him. He takes Karen's jewelry box out of the crate, lifts the hand-carved horn lid, and removes the inner tray. Unfortunately, whatever he sees inside is invisible to the camera. When Karen walks in carrying a basket of stuffed with bedsheets and pillowcases, Navidson has already turned his attention to the old hairbrush lying next to some perfume bottles. "What are you doing?" she immediately asks. "This is nice," he says, removing a big clump of her blonde hair from the tines and tossing it into the wastebasket. "Give me that," Karen demands. "Just you watch. One day I'll go bald, then you would be sorry you threw that away." "No," Navidson replies with a grin. It is unnecessary to dwell here on the multiple ways in which these few seconds demonstrate how much Navidson values Karen, except to highlight how despite his sarcasm and apparent disregard for her things, the scene itself represents the exact opposite. Using image and exquisitely controlled edits, Navidson has in effect preserved her hair, called into question his own behavior, and perhaps in some ways contradicted his own closing remark, which, as Samuel T. Glade has pointed out, could refer to either watch, bold, or sorry, or all 3. Even better, Navidson has permitted the action and subtlety of the composition to represent the profound sentiments at work, without the molestations of some ill-conceived voiceover or manipulative soundtrack. In keeping with this approach, the second moment also does without explanations or disingenuous musical cues. Navidson simply concentrates on Karen Green, once a model in the Ford agency in New York. She has since put behind her the life of Milan fashion shoots and Vietnam masks in order to raise her 2 children. Considering how beautiful she appears on the dreadful high-8 tapes, it is hardly surprising editors frequently rely on her slides of her pouty lips, high cheekbones, and hazel eyes to sell their magazines. Early on, Navidson gave Karen a high 8 which he asked her to treat like a journal, Her video entries, which Navidson promised to view only after the film was shot and then only if she agreed, reveal a 37-year-old woman who worries about leaving the city, growing old, keeping trim, and staying happy. Nevertheless, despite their purely confessional content, it is not a journal entry but rather an unguarded moment captured on one of the House Hiatus films that demonstrates Karen's almost bewildering dependence on Navidson. Karen sits with Chad and Daisy in their living room. The children are in the midst of a candle-making project which involves several empty egg cartons, a dozen long lengths of wick, a bucket of plaster of Paris, and a jar full of crystal wax. Using a pair of red-handled scissors, Daisy cuts the wicks down to 3-inch pieces and then presses them down into an egg cup, which Chad in turn fills with a layer of plaster followed by a layer of tiny wax beads. The result is some kind of candle with plenty of goop to go around, most of it ending up on the children's hands. Karen helps brush the hair out of her daughter's eyes lest she try to do it herself and end up smearing plaster all over her face. And yet, even though Karen keeps Chad from overfilling the molds or Daisy from hurting herself with the scissors, she still cannot resist looking out the window every couple of minutes. The sound of a passing truck causes her to glance away. Even if there is no sound, the weight of 100 seconds always turns her head. Though clearly a matter of opinion, Karen's gaze seems just as lost as it is suffused with love and longing. The reasons are, in part, answered when at last Navidson's car pulls into the driveway. Karen hardly attempts to contain her relief. She instantly leaps up from the mini candle factory and dashes from the room. Seconds later, no doubt thinking better of herself, she returns. "Daisy, hold off using the scissors until I get back." "Mommy!" Daisy shrills. "You heard what I said. Chad, keep an eye on your sister." "Daisy, Mommy also wants you to look after your brother." This seems to appease the little girl, and when she actually settles down, smugly eyeing Chad, even as she continues to snip wigs. Strangely enough, by the time Karen reaches Navidson in the foyer, she has effectively masked all her eagerness to see him. Her indifference is highly instructive, in that peculiar contradiction that serves as connective tissue in so many relationships. It is possible to see that she loves Navidson almost as much as she has no room for him. "Hey, the water heater's on the fritz," she manages to say. "When did that happen?" She accepts his briefcase. "I guess last night." What both of these moments reveal is how much Will and Karen need each other, and yet how difficult they find handling and communicating those feelings. Unfortunately, critics have been less than sympathetic. Following the release of the Navidson Record, neither Karen nor Navidson's reputation escaped unscathed. Karen, in particular, was decimated by a vituperative stream of accusations from the tabloids, reputable reviewers, and even an estranged sister. Leslie Buckman blows high the roof beams when she calls Karen Green a cold bitch, plain and simple, a high-fashion model not much smarter than a radiator, who grew up thinking life revolved around club owners, cocaine, and credit card limits. Watching her burble on about her weight, her children, and how much she needs Navidson made me want to retch. How could she say she loves a man when she's incapable of anything even remotely resembling commitment? Did I say she was a cold bitch? She was also a slut. Buckman is not alone in her opinion. Dale Cordigan has also pointed out that Karen was anything but a lovely housewife. Karen hardly gave up the promiscuous behavior that marked her 20s. She only became more discreet. In retrospect, the rapid speculation over Karen's infidelities seems driven by a principally sexist culture, especially since so little attention was paid to Navidson's role in their relationship. As David Little once exclaimed, "If he has horns, who's to say he doesn't have hooves?" Fortunately, unlike the biased treatment offered by the media, Navidson does not hesitate to constantly include in his film evidence of his own failings. In fact, as of late, many have called into question the accuracy of his self-portrait, observing that Navidson may have gone too far out of his way to cast himself in a less than favorable light.